In this lesson, we're going to be talking about differences between legal investigations and corporate investigations. Now, a corporate investigation, you may follow a lot of the same procedures and certainly be looking for some of the same types of data as you would with a legal investigation. The difference is with a corporate investigation, you're not going to end up, or hopefully you're not going to end up in a court of law where there are all sorts of rules about how you handle evidence and making sure that you've got the best evidence and the true evidence and that you've kept a clear and accurate chain of custody log and all of the other rules around how you handle evidence. Since it's really just about finding maybe a policy violation where there may be some disciplinary action against a particular employee, you may not have to worry as much about how you handle the evidence as long as you can present a case that is clear and is accurate so that we can get to the truth and be able to determine, in the case of the example that we're talking about here, that there was or wasn't a policy violation. Since it doesn't ever show up in a court of law, you may not have to worry so much about how you're handling the evidence, other than you still need to follow a lot of the same safe handling procedures, because you don't want to get to a point where you've opened the door to liability to the company because you haven't handled the evidence safely and some of the evidence is called into question. But they're not as rigid because the rules aren't really the same with a corporate investigation. So we don't have to worry maybe as much about chain of custody. So here's actually the EPA has a little presentation or a little course on chain of custody and how the EPA employees should be handling samples and data. So you wouldn't have maybe the same chain of custody processes and procedures with a corporate investigation as you do with a legal investigation, because you're not going to show up in front of a judge, or you hope you're not going to show up in front of a judge. So you may not have to do the same chain of custody documentation or be as rigid about it as you would in a legal investigation, simply, again, because you're not going to show up in front of a judge and have to present and do evidence and testimony regarding how the evidence was handled and what the chain of custody was. Since we're not in a court of law, we also don't have to necessarily follow the same rules of evidence. And you can see here, this is the Cornell University Law School, and here's all of the federal rules of evidence. There's an Article 4 here with relevance and its limits. So we've got test for relevant evidence. So there's a lot of rules of evidence that you have to make sure that you follow so that you can provide testimony or evidence to a court case. And we don't have that same sort of restriction necessarily with a corporate investigation. Also don't necessarily have to do the same level of safe handling and storage of the evidence. So you may not have to use these commercial solutions, these really expensive high-end commercial solutions here for evidence storage, because there aren't necessarily the same sorts of rules on presenting the evidence that we do in a court case when we're doing a corporate investigation. So I've been kind of hedging a little bit here and saying maybe and hopefully the thing about a corporate investigation is that there's always a possibility that it could end up in court at some point. So let's say that you are doing an investigation on somebody who's been accused of viewing pornography at work, as an example. And as you are doing the investigation, you discover that not only is there pornography there, but there's child pornography as well. Immediately, that becomes a legal issue, because while pornography isn't illegal, even though it may violate corporate policies, child pornography absolutely is illegal and has to be reported, and that person would be prosecuted. And so you have to make sure that the processes that you are following with regards to evidence handling and your chain of custody, you need to make sure that you are doing it in a way that you could hand off evidence to a law enforcement agency and have them be able to take it on and not have the evidence questioned. So again, while you're doing these corporate investigations, even though you may not have to have the same set of rules or processes that you would in a legal investigation because the bar isn't quite as high, don't assume that you can just go in and not worry about any of that, because you just never know when a corporate investigation is going to turn into a legal case. Even if it's not something as blatant as child pornography, there may be a case where you find evidence, and if you have had sloppy handling, an employee may be able to come back against the company in a lawsuit saying, you know, it wasn't right and they didn't really find the evidence that they said they did because the handling was sloppy. So you still want to be very careful and safe, even though there are some differences between corporate investigations and legal investigations. You still want to make sure that you are handling your evidence and data in a way that wouldn't preclude taking it to trial at some point as part of a legal proceeding.